Welcome to a brief history of graphic design. I am super stoked that you are here. If you're joining me today on this video, I highly suggest grabbing a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, sitting back and enjoying this video. If you don't have that kind of time, save this video, come back and watch it when you have some time because this is crucial. The history of graphic design, I'm actually gonna take a sip right now, is absolutely important to the foundation of you as a graphic designer. And as we're working through this brief history of graphic design, you're going to see that because in order to make sure that you use the styles, the tools and techniques accurately, you have to understand where they came from. You have to understand what the goal of the person who was using them at their initial creation was trying to communicate. And I'm going to do that with you by helping you see how design was used and applied. And then that way, when you go and you pull from the masters of the past and bring it into the present time, you'll be using it accurately. And so let me say that this is sort of a brief history of graphic design. This is a brief history as far as brief histories are concerned, thinking that I spent over 3 semesters in design school learning about the history of design. If I can do it in about an hour, I am definitely killing it on the brief aspect. So definitely sit back, relax, and enjoy this time learning about the graphic design history. One quick shout out that I want to talk about on why I'm doing this. So if you're interested, I am creating something called the Nomad School of Design. Basically, you can learn design anytime, anywhere. And this is something that I have had a vision for a long time. And now I'm finally getting to the point where it's coming in to creation. And so if you want to be a part of that initial run of graphic designers who I'm going to train from, no knowledge, no information, all the way up to full-time, getting a job as graphic designers, then I want you to click the link below and join the Facebook group that I have set up, or text design-online-FB to 44222. And now what this will do is this will get you in the group, and this will let me know that you are definitely interested in becoming a graphic designer and doing it fully online and getting mentorship and getting the help you need to launch your career. So head on over there, join that. If you're here as a graphic designer knowing nothing about history or wanting to brush up, welcome. I'm stoked you are here. And I'm just excited to talk through this. So this is going to be a fun time for me. I love talking about the history of design. And so let's work on through this right now. So the importance of graphic design history for designers. As I just discussed, it is all about understanding why you're using certain design styles, why you're using certain techniques, why you're moving design in a certain direction, and why you're using certain colors. It's crucial. I mean, it's absolutely crucial to understand what you're doing, or else you have no idea the communication you're actually putting out. There are so many times that people will do a design in a certain style, and they don't understand that they're communicating vision B when they think they're communicating vision A. And so it gets lost in translation when what it was actually originally created for. Subconsciously, the mind still understands it this way, even though you're trying to use it this way. And so that's really one of the big things I want to talk through, is that you're trying to develop your understanding of the field, you're trying to be inspired, and you're trying to know what you are saying. Because if you say it wrong, you might as well not even say it at all. It's the difference between creative confusion and communication. And as designers, we want to be experts at communication. All right, so I'm going to do a quick test. If anybody can tell me who created this piece, what era it was from, and the purpose of its messaging. So I want you to head down right now into the comments below, or if you're on the live chat, jump over into that live chat and fill out what era this is from, who created this piece, and the goal of its communication. All right, you got your answers down there? All right, so this is Russian Constructivism. This was created by Alexander Rodchenko. And during the Russian Constructivist movement, I'm going to read you a quote. And it says, "Together the Constructivists would seek to find the communist expression of material construction, to establish a scientific base for the approach to constructing buildings and services that would fulfill the demands of communist culture. And so if you're a designer and you come across this piece, you say, I love that. I love the motion. I love the energy. I love the color. I love just the bold type. Man, I'm going to use that for X. And let's say X is very much of something positive, something that, you're trying to encourage people to maybe give money to a certain foundation. You're trying to do something very different from communism, let's just say that. And this is not a debate on communism versus socialism versus democracy. This is not politics. This is understanding clear communication. Well, if you use that design style, our minds subconsciously in our culture are going to get remnants of this right here. They're going to get remnants of this communist propaganda. And so that's why it's so important to understand where your design comes from and what you're doing as a graphic designer. And so the why, the when and the why, using certain styles, listening to the rules, breaking the rules when necessary and when clear, and combining different expressions to communicate different emotional stimuli and helping people to understand fully your message. That's the purpose of understanding history. So let's jump in. Where did it all start? Where did graphic design history start? Well, it started at the base of communication. As designers, we ought to be masters of communication. And so it started with cave paintings. And I know we're going way back. We're going old school here. We're going to the Aborigine boys. And these are some of the original cave paintings that have been found. These were dated back to about 4000 BC. And these were communicating their daily life. They were hunting, they were gathering, they were just painting out what their life was like. It's like kind of capturing in photography or having a family portrait. That's what's going on here in these cave paintings. So this is the oldest form of human communication known. It is clear communication. It is easy to understand. We can clearly define what the images represent, and that, to me, is what we can learn right here, right now from these original cave paintings, is clear communication. If you can't communicate clearly as a graphic designer, then put down your pencil, go back to the drawing, go back to, the mental brainstorming, and then come back when you can understand, okay, how can I communicate clearly the message that I have? So after that, we move on to Mesopotamia, the city of Urk. These are the original pictographs, 3100 BC. This is the first sign of a written language. Centuries later, cuneiform would rise from the roots of these pictographs, and we'd find representations of food, taxes, animals. So we're starting to understand, and we're starting to get a picture of the communication, the signs, the symbols, the tools. We're starting to form together communication and language from the cave paintings to 3100 BC in Mesopotamia, the pictographs. Things are starting to become clearer. We're starting to be able to communicate ourselves visually as a human species. And the next thing we jump into is illustrated manuscripts. And these illustrated manuscripts are found in Egypt. So as you see, we're starting to combine not only clearer images, we're starting to bring together the pictographs. We're starting to bring together how to explain what this scene is communicating. So this is 2340s BC. This is called the Book of the Dead. So this is cuneiform writings, visual paintings were used for storytelling. And so you're starting to see, if you think about it, look at this piece. It's almost like a modern day magazine. You got your main scene here in the middle. You have your different communicative words, pictographs on the outside. And, if you can visualize, it's almost just a magazine. And so you can see where you can draw inspiration all the way back to 2340 BC without any problems. It's just having the vision and the clear communication. All right, the next thing we're going to jump into is Chinese relief painting. And this is where we start to see the ability to generate reproductions in mass scale. So we'll jump into this piece here, and you can check this out. So you see these are etchings into different substances and materials. They use jade, ivory, gold, wood. Oh, they actually use jade twice. Sorry about that typo there. And so this gives you the opportunity to do mass production. And as designers, that's something that we thrive on, is the ability to produce magazines, is the ability to produce, now digital PDFs and downloads. It's that mass production. It's that first step towards what we can do today. The invention of the alphabet. So as you can see, this here is the Greek alphabet. But before the Greek alphabet, we had symbols from Egypt and China. 3 languages that spurred the rest of the world into language development were the North Semitic, the Aramaic, and the Greek. And so these 3 languages gave us the base for our main forms of communication around the world. After we got our languages established, we have, coming out of China, we have the invention of paper. So as you see, we're just making steps one by one forward in order to make communication more readily available and easier to participate in. You have Chao Lun in 105 BC. I know we're making big jumps here, but I don't want to hang around too far back too long. I know you're going to want to get to the newer current design stuff, but this is so crucial to understand. You have to understand the roots of where things came from in order to understand why each phase took place. So until the invention of paper, Asian cultures were binding together bamboo slates and wooden strips around 400 BC. And then 105 BC, Chao Lun invented paper. And he may have not been the first to invent paper. It may have come from someone somewhere else, but he was the first to bring it into mass production. He was the first to really bring it on the scene, promote it, use it. And so we credit him with the invention of paper. So if you're out there, if you invented paper, comment below, give me a shout. I'm totally kidding. Illuminated manuscripts is what we're jumping into next. I mean, absolutely beautiful. It's just amazing to see the transformation between the centuries of how much color, how much detail could just rise up from the from humans' inspiration. It's truly incredible to see. So these illuminated manuscripts, they were the combination of typography and art. They started to merge into this order of communication, and the stories were coming to life for those who were less literate. And so what you were seeing is people's ability for literacy was far lower during these time periods because there was no mass production of books. We're not going to see mass production of books for another about 1,000 years at this point. So these illustrated manuscripts allowed people to understand the story without being able to read. Most villages had a couple books in them. A lot of times, churches would have manuscripts, and that's where people would hear the reading of written word. Otherwise, it was passed down orally and through sound in order for people to learn the language. And so what you're seeing is moving forward of a written language, and then also the helpfulness of visual aids. And so what we're seeing here in this is graphic design was beginning the evolution as we know it with these illuminated manuscripts. So the evolution of printing. What we first see is typesetting. The Chinese used typesetting in order to communicate and mass produce different pieces, and they had movable type. What movable type allowed them to do was have single letters exchange places, and they didn't have to create these they had to create numbers and numbers of large casts and etchings to produce work. They could rearrange, they could organize, they could communicate different messages. And so you weren't trying to store tons and tons of plates. You were instead storing lots of individual letters and sentences and words, and then you could combine them into your own message. And so really this is some of the beginning roots of printing and the ability to do mass production in unique ways, not just print the same thing every time. And so these works became reproducible, and this is where the word typography comes from. It's the technique of using individual letter blocks to create reproducible works by moving, organizing, and reusing the blocks to create documents. I just love this evolution. I love to see how steps were taken each piece and process and just built upon. It reminds me of my favorite quote from Thomas Edison is, "I see farther only because I stand on the shoulders of giants." And I think that is so crucial in viewing the history of graphic design. All right, so we're making big jumps, big leaps here. We're jumping up to Gutenberg's printing press. So there it is. That is what produced the Gutenberg Bible. This was the first book ever produced on Gutenberg's press, and this gave us the ability to mass produce written works. He built the machine from scratch. He was from a wealthy family, and he built every single piece. He was a prolific metal worker. He was a prolific metal worker. He was very good with wood and different materials, which gave him the ability to create his own machine. It took him 10 years to develop it, and after he developed this machine, literacy skyrocketed. It's very much what the internet did for us in the early 90s and late 80s, moving up into the 2000s. The internet skyrocketed our ability to communicate around the world. Very much the same thing for the Gutenberg printing press. It just exponentially gave people the ability to begin to read and understand the written word. So Gutenberg's printing press was a absolute, just pivotal point in graphic design history and in the history of communication. All right, moving next into woodcuts. I love this because this is where you can start to see illustrations, art, designs, as it were, being able to be reproduced. And this is how you'll start to see the combination of type and visual illustration merge together. So the reproduction step towards design, illustrated books, designs become reproducible. And that is the biggest benefit for these woodcuts. Art is one of a kind oftentimes, but design, really you want to be able to reproduce on scale. That's one of the big differences between design. It kind of is becoming more valuable as it's reproduced, whereas art is more valuable as it is the one-of-a-kind piece. All right, so again, here we go. Going to take another sip of tea here. I hope you're enjoying this walkthrough so far of graphic design history. We're going to keep moving up through the levels and getting to what I kind of consider the good stuff, where you can start to see how the actual design industry took shape. If you're enjoying this, definitely share it out. Let people know, what you're learning about, what you're watching. And I would love for more people to really get this in their hands and understand design for its professional and historical value. A lot of times, I think design is just seen as something that, is kind of pulled together really quickly, or anybody can do it who has, a computer and Photoshop. But really, to understand truly the art and skill and craft of graphic design, you need to understand its history to understand what you are trying to say in the goal of your communication. All right, so the next thing we're moving into is stylized versions of typography. And this is where people really took liberties in combining Gutenberg's reproducible type and the stylization of woodcuts in one. And so they would kind of pull them together into the printing press, and you're starting to see just these beautiful works coming out in reproducible manners. And so these started in Germany. These were often reproduced in books. Swinheim and Penart's, the 1460s. These are really the two key figures to start to produce these illustrated, stylized versions of typography. Grab my place here again. All right, so a holistic approach to design. What we saw take place in the Italian Renaissance was this holistic approach to design. What became known during this time period, the 1460s to the 1480s, and extending on either side, was craftsmen would write, illustrate, and design his or her own work. So what they would do is they would start out by writing the work, and then they would illustrate the work, and then they would assemble it all and design it into one complete work. This work here is by Simon de Collins, and it is a graphic illustration. It was a graphic illustration for educational purposes, and it was, during that time period, it was that you did it all. You were the jack of all trades. And I think that is something that we've lost. You have a lot of experts, but you don't have a lot of jack of all trades. And it's interesting because as a designer, you can really take two approaches. You can take expertise, or you can take jack of all trades. Most times, people, and myself included, think expertise and specialization is where you're going to make the most monetary value, and you're going to double down on your influence in a specific field. I personally don't think that that is the most fulfilling role. But if you're looking to make money as a designer, that's your avenue. But if you're looking to be fulfilled and really have your vision unfold, then this is really the way you want to go, this Italian Renaissance ideal. But that being said, we'll keep moving forward. But my point is, if you want to make money, specialization is the way to go. If you want to be well-rounded and truly enjoy your craft, then I would say a jack-of-all-trades approach can be more fulfilling. People could argue both ways, simply my opinion. All right, so the flourishing in the time of conformity. So what you saw just a moment ago, we'll click back there real quick, is Simon de Colin's work of this graphic novel. Moving forward, I call this flourishing in a time of conformity because his graphic novel was, yes, interesting, but it was very bland, it was very standardized, and compared to this work by George Bickham, it is absolutely beautiful. I mean, he just took woodcuts, reproducible type, illustration, and just combined them into this beautiful work. And so flourishing in a time of conformity, he was stepping away from what people expected because of this industrialized movement with the printing press. I mean, you're going from original works and all these hand-done pieces to this industrialized, very much rhythmic printing press work. And so he kind of revolted against that and started to create some of these original pieces, which were in fact reproducible, but they didn't have that reproduction look. And so that's something that I really love about his work. And this was in the Rococo era. So in the Rococo era of painting, this was the 1710s. He was a poet, engraver, artist, and penman. He broke away from, like I said, that mechanical conformity. And so I love his work because it really just enlightens the design style in a time of just kind of standardized work. All right, so the heritage of type. So up until this point, type was very fluid. It didn't have really standardizations. There wasn't a lot of, we do it this way, and this is kind of the way it's set. This is how you produce letters at this height and this width. I'm not sure if you know a lot about typography. A great book that I would highly recommend is, let me grab it right here. It's called Thinking with Type. Let me step back to the mic. Thinking with Type. This really helps you understand how type is created from a mathematical standpoint. And I love this work a lot. What I'm saying is before this point, type was not very mathematical. And they really crunched down on getting it to the point where, okay, we understand why we're producing things and we understand what it means when we're producing the type that we're producing. All right. That was kind of a roundabout way to talk about the heritage of type, but let's jump in. So Castellan and Baskerville, these were two of the originators of getting a how do I say this? Of getting just conformity, not in a negative way, in a positive way. Because before that, like I said, it was very haphazard. And so Baskerville and Castellan were given the ability to make sure things were in order and were consistent. So William Castellan, font was used on the Declaration of Independence. So you see up here at the top in Congress, that is Castellan. And it is an English font used to declare our independence from England. And I just think that is pretty hilarious that we would do that. I don't know if that was purposeful, but I find that quite amusing. And next was Baskerville, created by John Baskerville. And he bridged the gap between old typography and modern typography as we know it today. So all that humbug about what I was talking about with standards versus non-standards, he was an instrumental piece in making that transition from old type to modern type. So custom typography is something we're going to move into next. So although we have standardization, although we have, these rules and these regulations on how to use type, we still need human expression. We still need to create something custom, something unique, which you still see today. There's typographers and people producing letter forms that are absolutely beautiful, and that goes without exception throughout design history. So we're going to look at these woodcut typographies What I love about this, and this was by a man named Leavenworth, if I'm not mistaken. Let me jump forward. Yep, William Leavenworth. He produced these woodcuts because his clients were coming to him with needs for just unique posters that would really capture attention. And I know I'm sure a lot of you have seen these. To me, he is one of the first people to really tamper with and pursue hierarchy. A lot of stuff pops out at you. I know the first thing that I see when I'm looking at this poster is 20 lions. And then I kind of jump down, I see Bengal tigers. And I'm like, okay, who is this? And this is the Manders. This is the royal with the birds and the beasts. And everything jumps out at you. And he really works the hierarchy, and he takes you kind of through a story. And I just love it because he's tampering with your visual mind in order to pull you in certain directions. And so the use of typography in a hierarchical is really important, because otherwise you're allowing your viewer to decide what they're going to look at first, what they're going to do first. And as a designer, we don't really want to allow people to do that. We want to bring them through a story, and we want to direct their eye. So this is produced with the scroll saw, and he made custom advertisements from his customers. And like I said, he was a leader in the development of hierarchy. The Industrial Revolution did a lot of great things for design. It gave us standardizations. It gave us the ability to reproduce in mass scale. Some people would say there was negative influences from the Industrial Revolution, but in my opinion, each time technology takes us to another level, you lose jobs, but you also create a handful of new jobs. I'm not going to go deep into this, but I think right now we're at the cusp of virtual reality and artificial intelligence, and a lot of people are in panic. But just like the Industrial Revolution, there will be jobs eliminated and there will be jobs added. That's not a political statement. What I'm just saying is that the Industrial Revolution changed things in art and design. And I think there was some good and some bad. Really, the biggest thing was the onset of more powerful, faster, stronger, more reliable, more consistent printing presses. This is a steam-powered printing press. It was created by Friedrich Koenig, and it was faster than any other printing press before it. We're moving up into the 1814 right now, and you're just seeing that design is becoming more necessary as technology is able to produce higher quantities. And so that's what I'm seeing also right now in the world we're in today. So you say, okay, are designers needed in this world anymore? Do we need graphic designers? And I would say we need more design now than ever before, because every single day you scroll through Instagram, you're on a news feed, you are, interacting with different applications, you're driving through town. Soon there's going to be electronic billboards everywhere you can look. And so design, in my opinion, is only continuing to grow. The need for graphic designers is only continuing to grow, just as it was during the Industrial Revolution. So we're hitting another revolution. This is just the digital revolution rather than the industrial. And so I think the need for designers continues to climb as as technology is integrated into culture. Next, we have the linotype printer. So this printer could easily and quickly set lines of type. It was, again, another step above the steam-powered printer in that it could do custom things. It could print custom pages faster. So the steam-powered was faster with production, so the ability to spit out more, but this one could do variety far faster. So this is called the linotype, and this is by Ottmar Mergenthaler. He produced the linotype. All right, so this is one of my favorite, I didn't show you this actually, so we'll jump back here. This is the linotype. I don't know if I showed you that or not. I'm jumping back and forth on my screens here. So that's the linotype by Otto Mergenthaler. All right, moving forward. So capturing life. This is what got me into graphic design. So this is one of the original connoisseurs of photography. This is Louis Jacques Degas, tested light-sensitive materials for capturing an image through glass lenses. So he is credited for really understanding how to take lenses, push light through them with light-sensitive material to capture an image. Then you have John Calvin Moss, who was the first to effectively transfer an image using a light-sensitive gelatin emulsion. And if you know anything about, 35 millimeter photography, film photography, you know that concept was refined through the, generations to be able to transfer images. So these two guys are really the leaders of photography. And as we know, photography has been absolutely crucial in the graphic design industry. Today, photos are still how we communicate. Before, Instagram, photos were in a mass quantity already. And then once Instagram, Facebook, MySpace all came about, Snapchat as well, for sure, the amount of photography that gets produced is just unreal. And so these guys here were crucial in the creation of that form of communication. So color and possibility unleashed. I love this because with the onset of these two printers, it's the lithography printer, and this is the chromolithographic printer. These two allowed far more expressions than ever before. The amount of color that the chromolithography printer could produce, the color range was just off the map from what anybody had ever seen. Now, how the lithography works is the concept of water and oil don't mix. And so when you apply oil paste to a flat printing stone, you scratch away the excess oil where you would like the ink to print, then that is where the print lays down. And so you're able to produce very quickly in very strong detail the work that you would like to create. Now, this was created around the turn of the 1800s, so late 1700s, early 1800s is when we see this technology come into play. All right, now getting into some art styles. We went through a lot of technology, went through a lot of different things involved in the Industrial Revolution to get design to where it is needed. So remember, the mass production of technology and works, books, articles, magazines, newspapers, whatever that might be, gave the need for more designers. And so we're going to now look at some art movements, some art styles that gave way and shaped graphic design. One of my favorite art movements personally is Art Nouveau. What I love about Art Nouveau is the very graphic illustration stylization that came with the art movement. They were very much interested in producing posters, very much interested in producing very live graphic communication. So the leaders in this time period were Alphonse Mucha was a leading key figure. His career was from 1912 to 1926. Edwin Grasset, Harper Magazine. He brought Art Nouveau into America. And then Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec, Moulin Rouge. So if you look at these, you can understand that these are what brought together illustration for magazines versus photo. So today we use a lot of photos in our magazine covers, but these were the recreation of photos. And this is the illustrative works that were on the cover of many magazines. All right, so the beginning of graphic design as we know it. The person I'm about to speak of next is really a key figure in setting up a lot of the baseline standardizations and foundational principles of graphic design. He would later partner up with a handful of individuals to create a school in which design would truly flourish and get its strong, dead set principles. But first, Peter Behrens started out at the, let me say this correctly, the Dusseldorf School of Arts and Crafts for Architecture, Art, and Designers. So that's where Peter Behrens started out. You can see right here. And after that, after he trained artists, designers, and architects, he moved into to work for a company called AEG. Now, AEG was a manufacturer of a lot of industrial goods. So fans, light bulbs, things of that nature. He was the first designer to promote the use of the grid. He was the first designer to introduce the world to branding, advertising, and informational materials. And so what you're seeing here is the first branding designer. He's the guy who said, okay, we need a logo, we need business cards, we need letterheads, we need advertising, we need informational materials, we need promotions, we need brochures. He was spearheading the idea that that was necessary. And just how crazy to think that that is so crucial in today's society, how every piece of technology or every item you buy comes with an instructional manual, packaging. There's branding that you know the difference between. If you go to, my son is about 8.5 months old now, and we go to the store, you can see the VTech toys versus the Play toys versus Fisher Price toys. It's all clear versus like the Target brand, completely understanding the differences between each brand. And you're saying, well, duh, obviously. Yes, but this is where it came from. He is the one who spearheaded this idea that branding was so crucial and so important. So this is around 1903 to about 1910, roughly, that these things were taking place. So the next thing I like to look at is modernism and cubism. And I always like to say, is this happenstance or is this intentional, that design gets kind of batched into this group? This futurism, cubism. Is it really an influential piece in graphic design history? Futurism and cubism are really avoiding all unnecessary elements to clear the way for strict communication. So as you see here, it's just, this is the image, this is what we need to say, this is the motion. So we have, a diver and he has flags and he has water and you can really understand the messaging, but there's not a lot of detail. It's very simple. It's very straightforward. So this is works from Pablo Picasso. You see Cubism is very disorganized and grotesque. And I personally don't like to say that we have a lot in common with Futurism, besides the fact that we're trying to be some people who communicate clearly with as little elements as possible. And I always say that design is not complete when there's nothing left to add, but when there's nothing left to take away. That's by one of my favorite authors, Antoine de Exupery, and he was so determined to say that you don't ever need to add. You start with something and you say, okay, does that help with the communication? Is that crucial? Is that necessary? You never want to distract somebody from the intended message. And so I appreciate that about Cubism and Futurism. I appreciate that they're trying to pull away all these unnecessary elements in order to get you to focus on the true point. What I don't understand, though, a lot of times is like how confusing some of the works can be. So if they're trying to pull away unnecessary things, why are we still confused when we look at them? Just a thought. I'll leave you with that, and we'll keep moving through this history of graphic design. What I find the next movement comes into play is something that was made in rebellion. It makes its way into art history. Some people say it has influential remnants of communication in graphic design. But overall, I'm a little confused on the movement. It's called the Dada Movement. I know a lot of you, I'm sure, recognize this. This can be a bit of a statement piece, I think, is what I find this movement more than anything. This was from Marcel Duchamp. Coming off the tail end of World War I, the Dada movement was rebelling against the establishment. So it was people who were tired of the war, tired of the killing, tired of the hate. But in a sense, they produced more confusion with their artwork. They produced more uncertainty with their artwork. And so I appreciate what they were doing. They were trying to step against what was happening with the war. There was a lot of killing, a lot of brokenness, a lot of destruction happening, and it was their response to it. To me, it needs to be put into play, because if you're going to do something like this with your design, if you're going to cause a certain feeling and a certain emotion and a certain uneasiness with your design, there has to be purpose behind it. And so that's why I think this is still so crucial in the history of graphic design, is because they were doing this with purpose. And so if you're going to do something like this, make sure it is for a reason. Don't just do it for the sake of doing it. So that's why I think the Dada movement is still very crucial in the history of graphic design. All right, the next thing we're going to move into is where we start to see some of this vector illustration come from. So what is the rise of vector illustration? And I love this movement. This is a piece by Bernhard, Lucian Bernhard. I love his work. It is more formally known as pictorial modernism and also Plakerstil. It's German for poster styles. This is where we get our flat vector shapes used in great designs, people, objects, etc. So I really enjoy this movement, and if you're interested in getting more deep into vector illustrations, then definitely go look at pictorial modernism, Plakerstil, and the work from Bernhard. And like I said, the reason we're going through all of these different designers, all these different design styles, is because we want to know where to look back to in order to be inspired and in order to understand how we can communicate more clearly with the message that we have. So our client comes to us, or we have a vision and an idea. Where do we need to go to pull from to then come back and say, okay, this is what I believe would communicate it best, because this is what the subconscious of the mind understands because of the historical value. One of my favorite quotes about history is, people who forget history are doomed to repeat it. And that, I believe, is something that you cannot neglect as a graphic designer. If you repeat it, make sure you're repeating it with purpose and accuracy. All right. Even war has its own look. We're moving into World War II, when America was producing design to get people pro-war. There's something about this design movement that I absolutely love. The reason being is they were able to take something so broken, so destructive, and put a lightness and an air about it. And so if you as a designer have a difficult subject that you're trying to communicate, I would definitely look to these posters as inspiration, because they took something that was necessary in order to end a mass slaughter of people throughout the world, and they brought a light to it. Was it right? Was it wrong? That's something that I think we'll leave to historians and to different people who study this deeper. But from a design standpoint, that's when I'm talking about these historical values of this design. I'm not talking about the political aspects. I'm talking about the design. So from a design point, these propaganda posters were able to idealize the vision of the war. They painted the war not for how it was, but to be seen rather for what it could be. And that is one thing that amazed me about these pieces. And I look back to them often because I'm amazed how well that the designers for these pieces produced them. A lot of times you can't find who designed these pieces. I'm sure with a little more digging into it, you could, but for this brief design history, I'm not going to go on and on. This has its roots in Plakerstil, Art Nouveau, chromolithography, and the Industrial Revolution. So the power of shape and form. This too is stepping back into the Russian Constructivism movement. This is from a designer named L. Lisitsky. And this is reminiscent of pictographs with its use of objects, lines, and letters to communicate the idea. So these group of designers, L. Lisitsky and David and Vladimir Berluk, are key players in Russian Constructivism. And the reason this is coming back into play is because these two would be kicked out, maybe not exactly kicked out, but would run and find refuge in other countries when communism really started to crack down on a lot of artists who were communicating in ways that they did not want. They started to get a little bit of their own voice, and the communist regime did not appreciate that. So we find a lot of designers fleeing different communist-oriented countries, for countries like Switzerland, America, in order to be able to still freely communicate. Accents and colors. This is another thing we're moving into. If anybody can name this right now, I want you to head down into the comment section below. who produced this piece and how much did it sell for. I'll give you a minute to do that. This piece was a great inspiration to me as a graphic designer. It helped me to understand grid. It helped me to understand proportion. It helped me to understand minimalist communication. This movement, I think, is really neat. And this is called the Distill movement. And this piece is by Piet Mondrian. And it sold for $50.3 million. Wow. That's all I have to say. Harmony and order was established through a reduction of geometric elements. That is really the purpose of the Distill movement, is the reduction of the overuse of elements, and they just simplified. And so I've been able to glean a lot of inspiration and put together a lot of nice design pieces from using some of these lines, some of these groupings, some of these grids. They're kind of unconventional grids, I like to call them. All right, so the foundations of modern graphic design. The Bauhaus. If you know anything about graphic design, you know about the Bauhaus. My teachers in college were huge fans of the Bauhaus. There was a bit of a rivalry between two of my teachers. One would just thought it was the greatest thing ever. The other thought it was applicable, but not, the rules of the industry. But the Bauhaus was crucial in setting up the principles and applications of graphic design. It had 3 locations throughout its history. It had a location in Weimar, Dessau, and Berlin, led by Walter Gropius in Weimar, Hans Meyer in Dessau, and Ludwig Miles van der Rohe in Berlin. They established the principles and practices and philosophy of graphic design. It found its roots in Distill and Constructivism. The reason being is there was a lot of designers and artists who came out of Russia, who came out of Germany, to be a part of the Bauhaus. We have Paul Klee, Wassily Kandinsky, Johannes Itten, Lionel Finger, Laszlo Moholy-Nagy, Herbert Bayer, and Joseph Albers. Now, one very interesting thing about the Bauhaus, and if you want a full history on the Bauhaus, that is something that we will do in the Nomad School of Design. But this, again, is just an overview for you to understand key and notable time periods to go research and understand for yourself, unless you join us over at Nomad School of Design. The Nazis ended up pushing the members of the Bauhaus out of Germany. Which is why we see 3 locations. So what happened was they would, kind of get going. They would establish themselves. They would teach, and then all of a sudden, Germany, the Nazis would kind of push them somewhere else. So they started in Weimar, and then all of a sudden they're like, okay, we don't want you here. Push you that way. And as you see, it was really created around the time of a lot of unrest in Germany. You got 1919 to 1928, 1928 to 1930. 1930 to 1933. So, World War II had just, come to a close. You're between World War I and World War II. And so there's a lot of unrest taking place. And ultimately, the Nazis ended up pushing them completely out of Germany. And a lot of them fled to, like I said, America, Switzerland, which is why we see Europe being such a key place for arts and culture for so long. And then all of a sudden, graphic design really takes its roots and its strengths in America, because they were running from the communist agenda to America, which was a place where they could express themselves. There were more individuals that were key players in the Bauhaus movement, but these are just some of the notable figures. All right, Jean Trixold's New Typography. So this is a gentleman who I really like his style. He believed that type should always be in movement. There always needs to be motion. He was arrested by the Nazis, and then he fled to Switzerland. So as you see, the Nazis kind of bit themselves in the butt because they had all of this opportunity for arts and culture and design. They had this opportunity to create, really good propaganda for their movement, which was not a good movement, obviously, when looking back. But it's funny how we can often cut off our nose to spite our face. And that's what the Nazis did with a lot of the arts and culture that were surrounding them. And so he fled to Switzerland. And what I love, what we can pull from the history to communicate effectively is don't get stuck in one area. One of his leading contributions was the fact that Jean explored, learned, grew, from the entire history of graphic design. You can see he pulls things from Russian Constructivism, he pulls things from the Bauhaus, he pulls things from Futurism, these angles and these lines. And so that's one thing I love about his work is don't get stuck. Pull things from different areas, be influenced, learn, grow, but make sure you're using them correctly. All right, the next gentleman who I really love to study, well, actually I believe, if I'm not mistaken, yes, it is one gentleman. Okay, good, I was on track. It would be Mr. Herbert Bayer. This gentleman was Photoshop before Photoshop existed. I love his work because you almost have an entire motion picture movie in one scene. You have clippings from skiers coming down the hill, to type coming across, to a close-up of a lady, to mountains in the background, to slopes in the foreground. His work is very dynamic. It tells a very strong story. So before Photoshop and Adobe were even a thought, he's producing this incredible work that just brings to life off of the page. We have emotion, texture, depth. Some videos can't even do as much emotional strength as his pieces were producing. So I really love Herbert Bayer's work. All right, America and graphic design. So like I said, a lot of the key figures were fleeing from the communist regimes, whether it be the Nazis, whether it be some of the agendas in Russia, and flooding to Switzerland, to America. So we see a lot of influences from these other countries coming into America and really creating that melting pot that we are so known for here when it comes to food, arts, culture. Well, design is definitely another one of those melting pots. So the first person to key the term graphic design was the man, the myth, the legend, Addison Dwiggins. Not many people know about him except for the fact that he created, he coined the term graphic design. He was a book producer, so he would design, he would lay out, he would culminate images in typography, and that is where he said, okay, this is graphic design. So that's Addison Dwiggins. Next, we have Lester Beale. I love his minimalist vector pieces with his use of typography and motion. This is where we see a lot of coming out of the Plackish style movement, or pictorial imagery and vector illustrations, as it's known. So you're going to start to see these designers pull from history past. And so that's where I really want you to pay attention. I want you to kind of guess, okay, where did this come from? So he was the first to incorporate the modernist movement in America. And like I said, that modernist, that cubism, that kind of pictorial design. He was taking a risk because it was not really an appreciated movement. It had those remnants of the Russian Constructivism, and being that there was a lot of tension of that movement, it wasn't highly accepted. But during that same time, the Russian designers were being pushed to America, which gave Beale a lot of support, and Russian Constructivism started to get a following and started to really find a movement in America. All right, Harper's Bazaar. The producer of these illustrations was a man named Arit, formerly known as Romain de Tirtov. He was Russian-born, trained in Paris, and moved to America. He's been known for bold colors, Cubism, and Art Deco. He was a leading designer for the covers of Harper's Bazaar for many years, and he's really the one who formed the vision of magazine covers before photography really took its spot. But what I love about his designs is they very much have a photo-esque look to them. They're very much just real life, everyday people doing everyday things. And so I just love the boldness and the brightness of his covers. So if you want to learn more about, good illustration, flat vector illustration, he's a great one to study. He's got a lot of great work with Harper's. All right, this is Alexei Brodovich. Love this work. First one to really start to manipulate type. As you see, he would take the shapes of the work that was given to him to create some of these magazines, some of these articles. So he would take the woman and he would, turn her into a type treatment. So he was really the first to express typography into form. He would make type treatment's a very bold statement in everyday design. So in magazines, books, posters, etc. So if you're looking for, unique type treatments and somebody to look to for the applications of those, Alexa Brodovich is fantastic. All right, so I love this guy because I'm a huge fan of grid. I'm a huge fan of organization. And so this is Josef Müller-Brockmann and also Armin Hoffman. But the work we're looking at here is by Brockmann. So the typography choices and applications of each typeface is crucial to the work of current graphic designers. And that's something that he really spearheaded. He spearheaded a lot of moving out of the Bauhaus movement. He spearheaded a lot of sans serif typefaces, a lot of the grid, and which really set the Swiss design movement apart from the Bauhaus. Because the Bauhaus, if you look at a lot of the works, they were not as keen on the grid as somebody like from the Swiss design movement like Brockmann. So you saw a lot of use in the Bauhaus movement of the sans serif typeface, but then a lot of times you didn't see the good solid grid that is used in something like the Swiss design style. And so those are kind of some key differences between those two movements, is the grid versus not grid. Also, an emphasis on establishing hierarchy was a big movement for Brockmann. You can see you read exactly what he wants you to read. And I think that is a very good trait of a designer, is directing the eye and taking charge of the piece. All right, no design lecture or historical walkthrough would be complete without mentioning this gentleman. We all know Paul Rand as somebody who's created the most original shapes and just unique twists at face value in America. He received influence from Paul Klee, Wassily Kandinsky, and the Cubist movement. Great works. I have read multiple volumes of his design as well as his thoughts on graphic design. Some other notable designers during this key time period would be Siep Pijnles for her excellent conceptual photography, Otto Storch for his manipulation of typography and integration of photography, Helmut Krohn for his incredible use of subtlety and white space, Herb Lublin on how to break the rules of typography. I find a lot of people go a little grotesque when breaking the rules of typography, but I love his use of just off kilter. It's just kind of out there the way he uses typography, so definitely go check him out. And then George Lois inspires me, but I'll let you discover if he inspires you. I think his work is very influential on a lot of stuff that I love and like to see in the graphic design industry. All right, moving forward to another key and absolutely crucial designer in history, Saul Boss. Saul Boss brought to life movie posters in a whole new way. Up until this point, consider posters like Casablanca. They were very much big, bright images of the actors, maybe remnants of a scene from the movie. Saul took another spin on it. He created this very mysterious look into the life of the movie. It was dramatic shapes. It was colors were his secret go-to weapons for creating tense scenes that leave you wanting to know what will unfold in the cinema. Whereas in the older movie posters, I found a lot of times they kind of painted it for you. They kind of said, hey, this is what you're going to expect, where he left it up to mystery. And that was a new look. That was a new thing in design as we knew it, was that mysterious form that he created. So editorial design took off in the 1950s with page layouts that brought drab information to life. And that's what I really like about what Saul did for the design industry. All right, so now before we move into this next key figure, this is somebody you could really learn from in order to kind of pull back all that inspirational courage that gets you into trouble as a new designer. As a new designer, you oftentimes, at least when I speak from my own perspective, think that you know way more than you do. And that's okay. That confidence is very important. But if you look to key designers in order to pull back some of those urges, you'll see that simplicity will always win over the abundance of creative elements and creative expression. And so by studying this next figure, you can really get a good base level on what your style is and how you express it. And so this next figure is the person who created the New York subway grid. He is responsible for creating this system to manage the insane cobweb or soup bowl, as it's called, under New York. I don't believe anybody else could really have done this in such a simple, clear way. This is Massimo Vanelli. He's notable for his Vanelli canon, where he describes his rules and his strict adherence to those rules no matter what his clients desire. His clients, he's been known for his clients to come to him, tell him exactly what they want, and him do the polar opposite because he believes that it was not best for the project. And in turn, produced an incredible project that was award-winning and communicated the actual goals and vision of that client. I'm not saying that you can ignore everything that your client tells you to do. Your client needs to be listened to, and what they say needs to be appreciated and valued. But it is important to have strict rules that you adhere to as a designer in order to make sure that your design communicates with clarity and focus. He only used 6 fonts in his entire career. He was obsessed with grids, right-align text, Helvetica, text edging the borders of the document are all indicators of a work from Massimo Vanelli. I did this. So for an entire year, I only used 3 fonts in graphic design when I was in my master's degree for graphic design. And my teachers never complained, they never noticed, because what you want to do is you want to find a type with a lot of variety. And if you have a type with a lot of variety, you can use the same type 25 to 50 different ways and create new looks and expressions every time. So try and do that. Try and stick to 3 to 6 fonts with a lot of diversity inside those font families. That's something that you can learn greatly from Massimo Vanelli. I love his work. He's been a great inspiration to me as a designer. This famous Bob Dylan poster, of course, comes from Milton Glasser. He's responsible for the resurgence of some remnants of Art Nouveau, but simplified down, of course. He's also responsible for the legendary Bob Dylan piece that you just saw and I Heart New York. So great designer. Definitely read a lot about him and a lot of his visual expressions as I was going through design school. All right, so this is what is considered the grunge movement of design. The grunge movement of design was an expression. It was a resurgence of a movement focusing on third world awareness. It was really heavy in political views. It was very raw, very tense. It's the type of design that makes you very uneasy when you look at it. They accomplished that very well. It, of course, is not my favorite design movement since I am one of more order grids and very much more like Massimo Vanelli. But there's some people who really gather great inspiration from the grunge movement. Gunter Rambo and Robert Masson are your 2 go-tos for sure in that movement, amongst some others. This next movement comes from 2 designers that I really think had great backgrounds in the principles of graphic design, because when you look at their work, it is very clear it makes sense. It is very loud. It is feels very chaotic, but when you look at it, it still has hierarchy and your eye is still pulled to the correct subject. And that is a very good use of the principles of graphic design. Though it's chaotic, it has purpose, it has direction. And this comes from David Carson and Paul Asher. This is a postmodernism. This postmodernism was a revolt against the constraints of the grid. They wanted to kick off the rules, have some fun, and produce some disorganization. But they were not haphazard, as I just said. They were people who were both studied in graphic design and very intentional. Paul Asher was the designer who created the iconic Citibank logo. So, I mean, when you look at this work versus this work, it's very different, but it was very intentional, and she accomplished it very well. And so that's what I'm saying. If you want to produce work like this, awesome. I think It's fantastic work. I think it works very well. I think it communicates very clearly, but you need to understand your foundations and your principles first before you go ahead and try and break the rules. Because if you go out and just do something of a postmodernist expression, and you don't understand the roots, it's just going to look like chaos, where she had good principles, good foundations, and it worked very well here. All right, so keeping our eyes on the horizon, who are some key figures you want to look at right now in graphic design? Some notable designers are Stefan Sagmeister, Chip Kidd, Michael Beirut, who was actually trained by Massimo Vanelli. He is now a member at Pentagram, a big design agency. Ruth Ansel, Chad Michael, and Shane Griffin. These are all very, very prominent key designers in the graphic design industry that you want to keep an eye on amongst all the historical values of graphic design. All right, well, if you've enjoyed that, again, click the link below this video or text design-online-Facebook or to 44222 to get a part of the Nomad School of Graphic Design, where I'm just looking to create an online experience for graphic design school that actually takes you from knowing nothing to being a full-time designer. Now, will that happen overnight? It will not. It will take work, but that is my goal. I want to see really a new sort of graphic design education that I wish I would have had. I believe my education was very strong, but there was things that were left out that I wish would have been there. The reason I did get them is because I pursued them through mentors and through some people who could help me bridge the gaps between where school was and where my career needed to start. So this has been a brief history of graphic design. I'm so grateful that you came out today. And if you stuck around this long, I appreciate you so much for hanging on to this video. My name is Benji Kaiser of benjikaiser.com. Please comment below, ask me any questions. But most of all, I want to see you over in that Facebook group getting on the Nomad School of Design. I will see you here on the next episode.